Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to some of you, and peace out to the rest of you. You already know who it is, what to press, and why. That being said, this is my first time doing a live stream, so I'm very sure that I'm going to have some hiccups and some mistakes this time. In the meantime, though, I really do appreciate you being patient. If I do make any mistakes, then thank you for being patient with me. I don't mean any harm. If I make some boo-boos or some errors. All right, first things first. Four of you are looking now. So if you can hear me clearly, would you please go ahead and just type in a one? Okay, five are watching now. Okay. I'm confused. I see why you. Okay, there you go. I got a one. All right, excellent. Okay. All right. Gentlemen, I do plan to put the link up later on, uh, depending on what the time frame is like. Um, yeah, depending on what the time frame is like. I don't want to be at this too long, but I've got preacher's blood in me, as you all know, and I may be here a while, with no harm intended. Um, all right, Salam Goshen. Thanks for letting me know. Good to see you. I'm confused. Um, okay. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start this up now. Uh, Looks like I got three watching at this point. So, did any of you that are in here now see my video from yesterday with the one I just put entitled Always Overthink This? If any of you all saw that, let me know. Always overthink it. Y'all didn't see it? Well, it doesn't matter. Okay, here's the deal. Yesterday, I was on the roof of the building. Well, about this time last night, I was on the roof of the building with some of my colleagues, two of them. And to protect their privacy and mine, of course, because I'm a selfish bastard, I'm going to call one of them West Side, like I did previously, and the other one Manchester, because one is from California, the other one's from Manchester, UK. Before we had the conversation that I told you all about, that Mike Torres knows from the video, wherein I told Manchester we got to always overthink this, and West Side knows why. Another conversation we had was about white supremacy, because Manchester is of East African origin. As a matter of fact, he's related to my wife. And then West Side is originally from Iran and Afghanistan. You might be saying, well, which one? Well, the area that he's from is Aria. And in antiquity, Aria was in both. As a matter of fact, his people came out of the Persians, the ancient Persians, but they also called it Aria at that time. I'm going to get straight to it, guys. As far as the history behind white supremacy goes, I'm just going to go ahead and get straight to the history. He told me with his own mouth that his people were responsible for the ideas of white supremacy, that nobody had thought of supremacy based on skin complexion before his people did. He explained to me that in the beginning, as his ancestors' empire um, began to develop materially and organizationally, kind of like the Romans and the Greeks did, and like the ancient Egyptian empire did, and like others did alongside them. A lot of empires were very well organized, to be honest. I mean, the Incas in South America built earthquake-proof buildings back in before any of the modern technology. I kid you not. The Incas were able to slice stone so tight to construct these buildings that you can't stick a sheet of paper in between them now. So that says a lot right there. So as of course, when people do these things, a lot of times people don't study history, so they don't really know that other people might have beaten them to something. We don't know who was the first person to write, as an example. We're not sure who made a lot of the medical discoveries, the herbal medical discoveries of the past. People just aren't really sure of that. So some things people do, and then they stumble upon certain knowledge and they think nobody else knew about it before them. So the Aryans were no exception. They became the Persians later, by name, I mean. Now, because of their material advancements, they thought they were better than everybody else. At this time, the Persians were aware of Africa, although they didn't call it Africa at that point. The Persians were aware of the Arabs that lived next door to them. Yeah, I'm confused. I'm gonna get to that one too, because there was a time I thought East Asians might have been the ones to hype it up, but what my man told me was kind of eye-opening. Because see, what we know was this: we know that Europeans developed color preference or color prejudice somewhere between the 16 and 1700s, probably late 1600s, and they actually developed it in order to justify what they were doing to Africa, because they had already wiped out a lot of the original Americans, and they had, of course, the Atlantic slave trade was in full swing by this time. So they had to justify what they had done and what they were in the process of doing at that time. So Europeans came up with white supremacy and hyping up their whiteness around these times, but it was after they'd already begun genocide of the original Americans and then kidnapping Africans to use for labor. But I'm gonna get back to that, because from the time I'm talking about, it was so long ago that he and I both can't even remember how long ago it was. Because when I read about the ancient Persian Empire, it spanned it a long time, and I can't remember when it began. When he read about this and learned about it in his own people's history, they didn't really have, because their calendar is different anyway, so he couldn't match up the exact years according to the Western calendar. So anyway, the Aryans were the precursors to the Persians, I mean, not the Aryan nation we see today, of the Aryan Brotherhood. But these Aryans, they were pale skinned. And he told me that in actuality, they knew that people had started off as dark skinned. You know what, I'm confused. Remind me to come back to that last question you asked. So he told me that the Aryans at that time already knew that people started off as dark skinned. So in the beginning, they didn't have any kind of concept themselves about being better just because they were, in fact, being better because they were, in fact, lighter skinned. They had a materialistic sense of being better. That's what he explained to me, that's how, when the empire became materially developed, that was the people's mindset. But they compared themselves to the Arabs next door. Now, we always like to say, oh, the Arabs, they black too. Well, at this point in time, the Arabs were on average darker than they are today. So most of them at that point would have been considered black today. So therefore, they got used to looking down on Arabs because of what Arabs did not have. They got used to also a contingent of them left Persia or area and went into the Indian subcontinent. And we know that story. They conquered the Dravidians, who were black people. So they conquered them because they had better weapons. Some historians say that they never conquered. They just went in and settled. Other historians say, well, no, they conquered. So Indians themselves argue about this. What we do know is that they went in and eventually they dominated. They did have better weapons. They had some better tools too. And eventually they were in control because they mostly controlled the north. And the south of the subcontinent, as we know, was pretty much the island of Sri Lanka and a very narrow tip in the southern half. So the land area they controlled was the wider land area at the top, which includes today Pakistan as well and Bangladesh. Yeah, they became the higher caste, because here's the thing: the Hindu religion did start from a contingent of Persians or Aryans. I say a contingent because they didn't stay at home with the others. They didn't necessarily stay in touch with the other Persians that they left behind when they went into the subcontinent. Whatever the case was, whether they conquered or whether they lived there, today people understand that the Dravidians and the Aryans couldn't keep their hands off each other. Some people would say, well, yeah, you know, you conquer, you dip into their women. Apparently it went both ways there. Apparently even Dravidian men were getting with Aryan women too, back at that point. Because Dravidians, the people will tell you that a real Dravidian is black, like indistinguishable from Africans. That's what they'll tell you. So when they did the tDNA test on people in India, and maybe it was 2007 or 2010, and may have even been before that, when they did the tDNA test on them, they found that Indian people in the subcontinent patrilineally descended from South African black folks. I kid you not. The tDNA, which is passed from father to son, they were finding this out, that it was, so that means that you had a lot of black men that were digging out Persian women too. So apparently the mixing must have gone both ways, but for whatever reason, it's the black tDNA that actually links them to South Africa that shows up in the majority of even the Northern Indian population today. But that's a different topic for another recording. What we know is that, again, the Hindu religion came about with a caste system in order to freeze the mixing, because, of course, the Persians didn't want to die out. The Hindu scriptures, one of them is called the Rig Veda, and I forgot the name of some of the other books, the names of some of the other books, but the Rig Veda describes the whites coming in and dominating or conquering the blacks, at least in certain areas. The funny thing is that there were also some generals from among the Aryans that were described as black. So in the Hindu text, black is used as a description, and it was not necessarily used as a pejorative or an insult. Assalamu alaikum, Eugene. What's happening, blood? All right, so it wasn't, there's not really evidence that it was considered to be inferior at that point. But what we do know is that the word Varna is their word for the caste system. Varna is the Sanskrit word for caste. It means color. It also means type, varieties, breeds, species, all that. It's got a lot of different meanings, but one of the meanings is color. And that's the one that people understand today. So, of course, the caste system was supposed to preserve a heritage. And this was after the mixing had already begun. So you can't unmix the mixed, but what you can do is you can stop the process, so to speak. And that's why castes are not supposed to marry other castes. That being said, we know the white supremacy either began there or it began back in area, Persia and Afghanistan. We know that. The Persians began to look down on darker people by association because they identified themselves based on their skin tone. They identified foreigners based on either non-black hair. Ironically, that means blonde and blue-eyed people would not have been recognized by them. That's the funny thing. But they also identified others by having dark skin. So if you had pale hair or you had dark skin, you were not them. They knew you were something else. So that's how they began to, by association over time, look down on darker skin. Whenever the East Asians started to do it, I'm not really sure, to be honest with you. I'm confused. I know that they developed the gene for light skin about 12,000 years ago. East Asians, what we call the Chinese, the Koreans, and the Japanese, the Mongolians, they actually were light skinned before there was a European race, a Caucasian race as we understand it today. Their gene developed about 12,000 years ago. It's a different gene than what the one that Europeans have that makes them light skinned. But that's also another talk. The gene that gives the Solomon Islands people blonde hair is a different gene than the Europeans have to have blonde hair. So if you get a blonde Solomon Islander and a blonde European, they're probably still gonna have a blonde kid, but the kid would have two different alleles that cause blonde hair. Whereas in Europe, a blonde European has two copies of the same allele, but that's another talk, genetics. I'm not gonna get into that right now. Point I'm making is that, yeah, I don't know when they started it. I know that they became light skinned probably even before there was such a thing as an Aryan, let alone a Caucasian. But that's how this got started. In India and in area, it got started from the Aryans. So these were the people that they were the first ones to identify themselves as a white people. They were the first ones to do it, and it was a descendant of one of them, West Side, that was on the rooftop with me last night that told me that they were the first ones to discriminate against darker skinned people. Now, I'm going to get into colorism, because what we understand now at this point is that colorism comes out of white supremacy. Apparently, white supremacy started out of colorism and then took a turn when it came back full circle. I'm going to address O'Shea Duke Jackson's video right quick. Kimora Lee Simmons turns her back on the black community for the Asian community. I'm not taking a dig at O'Shea, certainly not for this video. I don't agree with him cracking that Hotep joke a long time ago, saying I need to get a Hotep name too. Maybe dusty Allah. I don't agree with that because I'm not allowed to agree with somebody calling themselves Allah. I don't think he was really trying to take digs at the Lord. I think he was taking digs at the no-teps and the slow-teps. But nonetheless, that's the extent of any disagreement I've got with him. About the video, though, I'm mostly going to be addressing what I saw underneath the video, the comments. Because you can trace colorism back to racism. Yeah, sure. You can trace colorism back to white supremacy. The Arabs had an inferiority complex before Islam. Now, some of y'all are going to tell me, yeah, you know, it's a problem too. It's just like Christianity. No, if it was, I wouldn't have accepted it. But you can't take my word for it. You got to do your own research. What I can tell you is that before Islam, Arab people had an inferiority complex with relation to the Indians, who at that time were still on average darker, and with relation to the Persians, because the Arabs were mostly a few town dwellers next to wells and a bunch of Bedouins going back and forth between wells. So they really did live a rough and real simple life. So they knew about these civilizations in Persia and in India. And so they also had a materialistic inferiority complex. It wasn't racial per se. But eventually they started to, by association, develop a little bit of a racial inferiority complex too. That did happen. And that's why Arab men for a long time had preferred lighter skinned women. This existed even during the time of the Prophet, peace be to him. Now, I'm assuming that Europeans took on the ideas of color prejudice from Arabs who would have been colorists, not racist, even though they were pretty close to today's East Africans at that point, because that's where they came from. Arabs are actually East Africans. That's genetically proven. An Arab will tell you they're from Yemen. Okay, fine. A geneticist will tell you that Yemenis are from East Africa. So the Arabs are pretty much confessing that they're East African. Nonetheless, they would have been colorists at that time by association. But as we know, like I said, the Europeans began to take on color prejudice to justify what they were doing to the African people in the 16 and 1700s. So that's how, now from there, we already know how it started. White people did not actually start white supremacy, but they took it from some others, used it to justify what they were doing because they were too lazy to pick the cotton in their own, pick their own cotton, so to speak. And then they took white supremacy to the next level. Now, since they weaponized gunpowder, they didn't invent it, they didn't develop it, but since they weaponized gunpowder, after the Chinese stopped, the Chinese did it for about 40 years. They experimented with gunpowder and warfare for a 40-year period in the ancient empire. I can't even remember what years they were. They may have used it about 3 or 4 times in those 4 decades, those 40 years. And they decided it was too noisy and it wasn't real warfare, so they let it go. The Europeans, we know, they weaponized gunpowder, and the rest is history and our trauma today. But they also took, when they developed electronic media, they also did the same thing when it came to white supremacy. So they were able to take the gunpowder, colonize the world, and then put white supremacy on everybody's minds that did not have it before. So today you got people using skin bleach, but only in Europe and in North America do they use self-tanning lotion, a fake bake, what they call it. White folks call it a fake bake. If you see a white person tanned in the winter, and I noticed this in the Northeastern United States, when I had to work in Ohio and Pennsylvania in the Rust Belt, I noticed that they were talking about, oh, she got a fake bake so she could look better. But that's the only place you really see it. You go where people can actually get a tan and not catch pneumonia, and they wouldn't take one to save their lives. So anyway, that's going to be the beginning of white supremacy. Now I'm going to touch on and thank you guys for being patient with me as I make this long sermon. Now I'm going to touch on the misconceptions about colorism right quick. As for Kimora Lee Simmons on O'Shea Duke Jackson's video, she's either anti-black or she's just an opportunist. It could go either way. It's hard to tell. She's one person. She's got a black parent, and the other parent is Japanese and Korean, and they don't like each other usually. I mean, what I mean is Japanese and Koreans don't get along a lot. So we black folks make this mistake of thinking everybody's all together and they're all on code and they're not going to violate for anybody else. No, they always violate their codes for white people. That's the first thing we need to understand. Everybody looks up to Massa. Second thing we got to realize is that they are on code when we walk in the room, because again, white supremacy is a world religion. It is an international religion, and its idol is whiteness. Bilal Abdullah tells you this on his channel. Shout out to him. So Kimora Lee Simmons either is an opportunist or she is actually turning anti-black. I'm more prone to think she's an opportunist. So that means she finally saw that there was maybe a financial opportunity in condemning anti-Asian racism in the wake of COVID-19, but she doesn't see that it pays off if she condemns the anti-blackness present in Guangzhou in China, or in China as a whole, or in Korea as a whole. I'm not going to say anti-blackness in Japan because I found Japanese to be very biased against other Asians, but I haven't found them to be specifically biased against black folks just as being black, unless they were biased against everybody that was not Japanese. I found Japanese to either be ethnocentric or not ethnocentric. That's what I know about them. Chinese, we know they're Chinese who love whites and look down on blacks. Same with Koreans. And that's why I trash them the way I do. And I'm going to do it again. I don't trash them because of the virus. I trash them because of the other virus that starts with an R, or another one that starts with a WS. They're the same one. So anyway, the comments underneath O'Shea's video I saw were a problem, because a lot of people were starting to say, well, let's kick out the biracials. First thing is that these are assumptions that are made based on, well, it's based on an assumption that everybody biracial is lighter skinned. That's not always the case, usually, but not always. Take Tyson Beckford. Now, he's biracial, genetically he's biracial, but he doesn't look it per se. He actually looks like he's from the continent. He looks like a tribe in Sudan that has the same epicanthal folds and that blue-black color. That's what Tyson Beckford looks like. You drop him off in a certain part of Sudan and they'll be shocked that he doesn't speak their language. He'd have some explaining to do, like, why don't you speak the way we do? So we don't think of him as biracial. When they say biracial, they're talking about light-skinned folk. And they're talking about black folk that, or maybe black folk that have a looser texture of hair. That's what they're talking about. They're not thinking about Chili from TLC. They're not thinking about, they're thinking about Tyrese Gibson's wife. That's what they're thinking about. Now, I don't blame black folks for wanting to defend ourselves. We have a paranoia, though, because of our run-ins with other people. But we have to stop and think for a second. The people that we have had problems with have always been either dominated by the Aryans or dominated by the Europeans, who later on began to call themselves Aryan, as I'm Confused pointed out in here. Yes, later on in the 1800s, some of the Northern Europeans began to attribute themselves to having Aryan origins. They began to say that the ancient Persians were white, i.e. Northern European white. They began to say this. That wasn't true. Ancient Persians were not. And most of them today still aren't. But the Northern Europeans began to say this because these civilizations were older than any civilization in Europe. That's why they were trying to say this. It's the same thing with the Egyptian civilization, because it's one of the oldest civilizations. They want to turn around and try to make the ancient Egyptians seem like they were white, when in fact, as we know, they were not. Hold on, y'all. Let me answer. I'm sorry, I can't answer right now. I'm on a podcast. I swear if I wasn't on one. All right. So anyway, folks, they were trying to claim something very ancient as being them, because they were trying to claim to be very old and original. That's what all of that was about. So let's see here. Let's see what some of you all are saying. Salute, Liam. What's happening? Let me see what some of you all are saying. Yeah, Michael, I think I'm inclined to think that she's an opportunist more than she is just anti-black. I'm more inclined to think that. Okay, I'm confused. Yeah. Why am I not shocked? They straight up say that dark-skinned mixed people are okay. All right, folks, listen. I'm going to go ahead and try to answer this door right quick. So sorry to tell y'all this, but let me pause. I'm going to put everything on mute. So let me pause for about 20 seconds, inshallah. All right, Assalamu alaikum again, folks. Sorry about that. Okay, where I was telling you all about what their reactions are based on a kind of paranoia. But if we examine this, if we look at the history I just gave you all, we'll realize that the people who have so-called sold us out, walaikum salam, Brother Hayes. Yeah, Scott Haywood and Dwight Hayes. That's my first time. This is my first time going live ever. So if I make technical errors, that's my reason. I really, I'm doing this for the first time, figuring it out, winging it as I go along. So getting back to this, if we examine the history that I just gave you, every time we've been so-called sold out by people, look at their orientation. If we think about it, the Latin Americans that are not black, and many who were but didn't want to be black. Okay, but who dominated them? It was the Spaniards. We know the Spaniards had these ideas of white supremacy because they actually started the genocide of the original Americans. And they started with a bias against them that was religious. But as we know, they were the first ones to single out Africa to kidnap slaves, specifically on, not even on the basis of race, but it was Bartolomeo de las Casas. He was a priest in Hispaniola. He was ashamed of what the Spaniards were doing to the Taino Indians, and he was the one that suggested going to Africa to grab some people. He meant to do that to distract them from the original Americans, but of course it was more successful, and he later regretted making that suggestion, as we know, because the Portuguese were already in Africa. They were in the Congo and Angola. In today's terms, they were in the Congo and Angola, but they were in southern Central Africa, and they were kidnapping people and buying them and forcing the coastal people to kidnap interior people. They were the first ones to destabilize a region. So when people tell you, well, black people sold each other, they're giving you half the story. Because in reality, what they used to do was they used to take they used to take new weapons and hold them. They would take old weapons and offer them. And the conditions when they offered the old weapons in Africa were always the same. They would not take money for the old guns. They would only accept people in exchange for the guns. So you would see a weapon that's great for self-defense, but they would tell you, you have to bring people in exchange. So anyway, that's another story too for another recording. But if you look at who sold us out, you look at how the Spaniards got started in the Americas. And of course, they also became biased and prejudiced because they were going to buy into this white supremacy thing too once it got started. Whether they were the ones that started or if it was the British or the French or the Portuguese, whichever European started it, we're not really sure. We know that they were going to buy into this idea. So you're looking at the people that were ruled by the Spaniards, and they got their racial ideas from the Spaniards and the ideas of racial hierarchy from the Spaniards. Yeah, they're going to sell you out. Same thing with certain Native American tribes. Claude Anderson loves to tell you about how the Native Americans are our enemies too. Well, he's right if you're talking about the 5 tribes that the Europeans began to respect. I mean, specifically the British, the English, when they came into what's now the U.S. at that time, 13 colonies, they gave respect to 5 tribes because these tribes were the first ones to sell out and take on the European lifestyle. If they came from these tribes, then yes, they were helping to trap slaves, catch runaways, own slaves themselves. Yeah, they were. But other tribes did not participate in this. One example is the Narragansett. They did not. And as a matter of fact, there are instances of original Americans attacking English settlements and leaving alone the Africans because it was understood. Matter of fact, the first slave revolt ever in the Americas, first slave revolt in anywhere in any part of the Americas was in Hispaniola. And it was well-off Muslims from Senegal and Gambia today that united with the Taino. They got with one of the chiefs, and they called the chief Cacique, I think it was. The chief's name at that time was Enrique. So the well-off Muslims got together with the Taino chief Enrique, and they launched the first ever slave revolt in the Americas. It was a union between Black African Muslims and original Americans. So if people want to say to me that I'm following a pale Arab religion that doesn't rebel against injustice, I would say no. Go ahead and look up. It was either 1519 or 1521 that this happened. Yep, Seminole Wars. The Seminoles were actually a conglomeration of different tribes that came together in Florida, and there were Black Seminoles as well. Now, the Black Seminoles lived separately from the Red Seminoles, but they would live next door to each other, and they were allies against white supremacy and slavery. They didn't necessarily intermix genetically a whole lot, as far as what people back then wrote down. If they did, nobody wrote about it. But anyway, if you look at the Indians, I mean, the ones from India and the Pakistanis by extension, and you look at how they have thrown us under the bus. You look at how the Chinese and the Koreans have thrown us under the bus. All of these folks got their ideas of white supremacy either from their own neighbors, or they got them from Europeans, or both. And as a matter of fact, if you go into India today and you ask them about this colorism they have and why they're using skin bleach, most of them think that they're using it because of the British colonization. Some of them say, wait a minute, we had these same ideas long before the British. So it's a debate that they're having. It's hard to tell exactly where they got the idea from. But what I am going to tell you is that what we definitely know is that they got these ideas from the outside. We know that for sure. But then if you look in areas, certain parts of the world like Southeastern Asia, the tropical countries, I've said this before, they're not anti-Black. So when I looked at this video by Maura Lee Simmons, who was probably an opportunist more so than she is anti-Black, considering she's been married to 2 Black men and 1 white guy, considering that she's had children only with the Black husbands, never with the white husband, I noticed something. The people underneath are talking about, you know, let's be exclusive now and let's kick out the biracials. Here's where that goes wrong. If you're talking about kicking out biracials, as I'm Confused said, they'll straight up tell you, well, if you can't look and tell that they're biracial, then they can stay. Wait a minute, hold up. Where are they going to stop? Because see, right now, today, they're saying, no, they can stay. But see, previously, they would have said, well, you know, if you got Black blood, you can stay. 1 drop of Black blood makes you Black. We used to say that. Genetically speaking, that's pretty accurate. Genetically speaking. Yeah, there's not really a big issue with that. That's the one thing we used to agree with white folks about, if you notice. If an Arab says, I'm white, then we would laugh right along with the white guy at the Arab saying that he's white. You see, if the Latino said that he's white, we would laugh right along with the white guy because, you know, this Latino said that he's white or she's white. That's the one thing we agreed with them about, that 1 drop rule. Well, that's because genetically speaking, it can pop up again and again and again. So they're going to sit up and say today, well, anybody that has another non-African bloodline, let's kick them out, recategorize them. Then they're going to take those who are dark and mixed, and they're going to say, well, your nose and your lips aren't wide enough, and your hair's not 4C enough. Then they're going to start saying, well, wait a minute. Okay, you're unmixed, but you're a male, so you've got male privilege, and then they'll kick all Black men out. Then they'll turn to the women and they'll say, well, you know what? You don't weigh enough to be Black. Your body mass index is not high enough. I kid you not. If we look at the way that this is going, this is actually something that did not start with Black men. This is not a call that initiated from Black males. And before we know it, every Black male will be kicked out. Except, of course, the ones that they're afraid to go up to in person and say, you're not one of us, get out. In other words, the shooters, the gun toters, they won't be doing this to them. And of course, the women, they're not going to, they're not even going to leave each other alone. You're going to have to look specifically like Gabrielle Sidibe, Precious, in order to stay in by the time they're done. Your nose is too thin. Your lips ain't big enough. Your hand 4C enough. You ain't dark enough. And even if you got all these other things, but you're thin or you're medium weight, you don't belong because you haven't been oppressed enough. That's where this is going to end. So I'm going to tell y'all, this is something that we men are going to have to get on some of these colorism crybabies about, because the same ones calling for this are also sitting up here saying that it's better to get a white man, not another man of color, but specifically a white man. That's what they're saying. The same ones are crying about one thing, gentlemen. These colorism crybabies are not really crying about actual true oppression, because this is something that other people have had to look up. They're actually crying about nothing more than first preference to get into your wallet and your bank account. That's really what they're talking about. Is colorism a problem? I'm telling you it is. I witnessed it myself. I know it is. We've dealt with it before, but we know that it oftentimes goes both ways. The thing is that the actual issues that could be talked about are not the ones that the colorism crybabies are talking about. They're only talking about, if you notice, nothing other than beauty contests and movie and TV roles. In other words, male validation. They're not talking about anything else. They're not standing on their own too. They're not standing 10 toes, their own 10 toes down. They're talking about the attention that they get from men, and they don't even want most of the men that they can see. We already see Bookie done already said that. He said that the women told him this. The dating sites have said that in the West, only 13% of men are even visible to women. The other 87% are invisible. And until, of course, there's a utilitarian need, like they need someone to fix some plumbing or fix a refrigerator, and they don't want to pay full price. That's what the friends are for. I mean, he and they have said the same thing. So if they don't want most men, then why are they fighting over your attention? And then using color to do it. Because see, today they're going to use color, and that's just a smokescreen for something else. They're going to use color today, then they're going to use weight tomorrow. How dare you don't like him obese? And then they're just going to, and then the next day they're going to start using regular gender preferences. How dare you don't like her because she has the face of a man? That's what they're going to start doing. Before you know it, they're going to start getting on you. It's already started really getting on you for being heterosexual. Yeah, exactly, Ty Dan. Lizzo. And see, people are saying, how come Jill Scott gets more credit than Lizzo? Well, you know, Jill Scott did something that was a bit uncomposed. She did a little oral demonstration on the microphone one time. And this is after she's been, you know, an entertainer and famous for years. Lizzo, my first time hearing about her, honestly, was when she went and twerked half naked at some game. That was my first time hearing about her. So she was not only less famous, but Lizzo did something that was even tackier than what Jill Scott had done. You simply look at the track records. And so while we're sitting up here judging objectively, they're not judging objectively. They're judging oftentimes based on instinct. They're judging us men based on instinct. That's why you ask them what they actually like. They'll sit up and say, well, I can't explain it. They start using a lot of unclear terms, right? Well, he just has that thing, you know? No, I don't know. You ain't said nothing yet. You haven't used any clear vocabulary to describe it. So that's what we're looking at. They're using a real issue that should be attacked to pretty much draw attention to a complaint they have that enough of us are not financially validating them. That's really what it comes down to. When I say financially validate, I mean, I'm talking about chase after them and simp without even getting the same thing in return. Because you know doggone well, every one of you that's been friend zoned, you know, you could get a call at 3 a.m. I was washing clothes and it broke. My washer broke. I need you to come fix it. I got to go to work tomorrow. My clothes are they're all dirty, and so she needs you to do her this solid. And you ain't supposed to ask nothing in return. And if you even, I don't even mean below the belt. If you go back later and you say, okay, well, look, my stove busted, right? I can't finish cooking. So can you cook this and bring it to me? Or just cook something and bring it to me. Just bring me a plate. I can't leave the house because I got to plug up the gas leak. So I can't go in and order from outside. Do me this solid. She can look, she's like, I can get it to you tomorrow. And that's if you're lucky. So in reality, we're dealing with a type of misandry. In other words, a real issue, colorism, is It's something that has traumatized a lot of our elders, to be honest. But instead of us dealing with that, they want to use it as a smokescreen for saying that they deserve first access to your wallet. They want to make it about their egos instead of actually making it about healing a type of trauma. So tell you what, if any of you want to jump in, I'm going to try to post this link. I don't know how to do it, but let me see. Okay, all right. I think I got it. So I'm going to post this in the chat. Let's see if it's coming in. Okay, does it show up, gentlemen? Okay, all right. Okay, so what's in there? And if any of you want to jump in, I'm gonna give y'all some time. I think I've preached enough of a sermon at this point, and I hope I was able to clear up some historical discrepancies in the meantime. I'm gonna ask you all to do something for me while I'm waiting on anybody that wants to jump in. I'm gonna ask y'all to do something for me. Please take this information that I've said and share it with other people. I used to be a history teacher. Some of the stuff I knew when I was teaching history, and some of it I had to learn after I was no longer a history teacher. But I never stopped studying. And that's why I ask people questions in my real life, and I come and I bring this to you. But please try to give this information to other folks, because we're dealing with a lot of no-tep misconceptions. And that's why I call them no-teps and slow-teps. We're dealing with a lot of these misconceptions. And you're right, Mr. Torres. First, I got to do a deconstruction, and then I got to turn around and do a construction, a reconstruction mentally. Because a lot of us that really want to be pro-Black, I mean genuinely pro-Black, I don't mean a lot of us that are not trying to be frauds, that really have a good intention, still got a lot of misinformation. And that's, of course, that can be impossible to distinguish from just being a lazy bastard after enough time. You may just not know certain things today. You just don't know. And then next day, or the next week and the next month, you're tired of being challenged on stuff you didn't know, and then you're lazy. All right. What's happening, Supreme Ace? Yes, Black Misandry, it is. I'm going to give the proper Greek term for that, for Black Misandry. It's, I'm going to give the spelling, and then I'm going to give the pronunciation as best I know. Misandra Mavros is the term for Black misandry. I mean, that would be the Greek term for it. So anyway, I'm gonna give it 30 more seconds if anybody wants to get in, and if not, then I'm gonna go ahead and end this. I think the link is up on your page, so if y'all click that, it'll take you in here. I'm confused. I'm shocked you don't want to jump in, man. I bet my keyboard is loud as I'll get out, isn't it? Okay, all right. Well, it looks like 30 seconds is up. So listen, thank you all very much for tuning in. Please hit that share button. Let folks know. Because we have every right to confront white supremacy. We got every right to tackle the issue of colorism at the real issues. And I just want this to benefit a lot of other people, which is part of why it is that, well, that's the main reason that I did this. I want this to get out there, and it's up to you to make sure that this gets out there. Because remember, a lie will make a trip around the world before the truth gets up and puts its pants on. The reason is because the lies get repeated. This time I'm asking you all to repeat the truths. And if I made any errors or if I left out something that's important, feel free to hit me up and let me know. You can do it under the comment section. You can do it in the chat now. If you can type fast enough, you can come back into the comment section, let me know anything, because I'm still learning history. A history teacher never stops learning. It's just like a physician never stops learning medicine, even after he's started to practice. Tied in TV, I'm glad you enjoyed it, man. I hope it helped, because I really just wanted to clear up misconceptions. Since nobody's joining in, I will catch you all on the next one. The blackest of the black, signing black out. Assalamu alaikum and black heterosexual male power just because they don't like it.